Already have our speaker in the house. He's already on the meeting. Today we're going to be looking at, hold on. Okay, yeah, I can see him now. Sorry, I was double checking to be sure that our speaker is in the house already. So today we're going to be looking at the topic, 1 minute, please. All right, today we're going to be looking at the topic, uh, policy advocacy and market-based solution. And our facilitator for today is going to be Mr. Henri Kouam of the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, I believe. Sorry, 1 minute, please. Yeah. So today we're going to be looking at policy advocacy and market-based solutions, and our facilitator for today is Mr. Henri Kouam of the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute. So, without further wasting our time, I think I've already done that for like the past 7 minutes. Without further wasting our time, I would allow Mr. Henry to take over the meeting. Mr. Henry, the mic is yours, please. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we
Hold
can
on.
hear you, that one. Please, let's turn on our cameras. Let's see our face.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Great. Yes, we can hear you and see you very clearly.
Well, it's good to be here. Hi Ahmed. Thank you to Face of Liberty for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to share the very little that I know with advocates from around the continent. So today we're going to be talking about public policy, but I want us to challenge ourselves. Let's try and make this a learning experience both for you and both for me on examples that are anchored in Nigeria's experience on trade, on the environment, on healthcare, etc. And the point of today is not for me to tell you guys how the policy process works in Nigeria, but for both of us to establish how we can influence any type of policy system, because I think there are broad principles that are the same. And the challenge is just making sure that those principles are applied to your respective economies. So I've prepared a very, very short presentation, which I'm going to share with you guys. Um, And just a bit about the presentation is we're going to essentially focus on um, we're going to focus on what policy advocacy is, first of all, and then we're going to talk about the golden rules of policy advocacy. And after that, we're going to talk about whose voices are heard. When we talk about policy, who are we referring to? Because the policy space is not, it's still very convoluted, which means that sometimes the people that we're referring to or speaking to, sometimes they're a target audience, sometimes it's people we disagree with, sometimes it's just other members of civil society who might be impacted by a project, but they're not yet aware of what that impact will be. But what we hope to do today is to talk about market-based solutions. So what are markets? Markets are barely a system that allows free exchange, where the price signals come from what individuals want and what individuals prefer. So if you give me just 1 second, I'm just trying to get my slides to work properly. So we're going to talk about advocacy. We'll talk about whose voices are heard, and then we'll talk about the difference between advising, advocacy, lobbying, and activism. Because as free market associates, we all use a very, very different approach. For example, us at the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, depending on the issue, sometimes we're advising, Other times we're lobbying, if we're working with companies on particular issues, for example, on the business environment or on taxation policy, we're trying to achieve a specific aim. Other times we're much more activist about the things that we're doing. So there's no one correct approach that we're going to be using. There's a range of approaches, and the challenge is just making sure that the approach that you choose is appropriate for the specific time where you are, where you find yourself. We're equally going to brush on a few um, um, we're going to brush on a few concepts when it comes to the free market. And just so we have a broad understanding of what it is. Now, I'm talking about the free market institutions and individuals, collective agents, the exchange of goods and services. All of these things happen in every single economy, but the way they happen differs from one economy to another. For example, if we take healthcare, when we hear free markets, the first thing we think about the United States, for example, is that private actors, pharmaceutical companies decide which prices they set on what products, and so it's really a market-led process. But talking about it in those terms is very, very simplistic because that's not actually the reality of how the policy making process works in the United States. So before we get started with the presentation, what are markets? When we think about markets, we're referring to institutions where there are individuals or collective agents who exchange goods or services. Now, they usually use money as a medium of exchange, and that the medium of exchange is what brings about the formation of prices. So markets are essentially distinguished based on the types of goods and services that are sold in them. That's why we have financial markets where people buy shares, stocks, bonds. We have the housing market, we have the labor market, etc. In terms of scope, of course, you could be thinking more about the local economy, or you could be thinking at the national level, the regional level, or international level. Now, the mere fact of trying to promote markets, we're not just trying to promote markets, but we're trying to promote competitive markets that are free. Because remember that you also have oligopolistic markets, right? You also have oligopolistic markets, for example, which do not have the best interest of the consumers at heart. So, from a normative perspective, like markets are of interest for various reasons. Because if you look at essentially markets depend on and in some ways they influence our social lives a lot. So we can analyze them through a range of disciplines, history, sociology, economics, but today we'll be focusing more on the economic aspect of things. Now, of course, when we think about markets, I want you guys as free market thinkers, it's important that we're not just promoting free markets without really having a solid theoretical background about what we are proposing. So I'm going to take the next 5 minutes just to give us a broad overview of, how of the three lines of traditions that have emerged when we're talking about markets. So now, there's a first line of thinkers, right? So basically, this whole idea of free markets came from what, from which part of the world? I don't know whether anyone wants to share, but obviously it's from essentially from Europe, right? Back in the 18th century. And it's largely endorsed by, Mandeville, Fables of Beasts, to the Scottish Enlightenment, where Adam Smith emerged with his inquiry into nature and the causes of wealth of nations. So essentially, that's kind of the bedrock of modern day economics. Now, in the 19th century, of course, Adam Smith and other early thinkers were mostly focused on classical economics. So that's where you have thinkers like Thomas Malthus, that was concerned about who focused on the population and population growth. David Ricardo, who focused much more on competitive advantage in free trade. Now, so you'd find that at the earlier part of in the 18th century, you had the Adam Smith, Mandevilles, then you had the Thomas Malthus, and eventually the David Ricardos. But after that, we get to the 20th century. That's when the Austrian school started dominating with thinkers like Ludwig von Mises, Joseph Schumpeter, Friedrich Hayek, who's very, very market oriented, James Buchanan, all of those people eventually came after. Now, and Milton Friedman is really the most famous economist from that time. So from the late 19th centuries until the 20th centuries. Now, the argument by friends of the market is that there's a thread that unites all of us. We all want to have access to quality products. We all want to ensure that those products are competitively priced. And the emphasis on market is on individualism, yes, which in some ways is different from our culture here in Africa, because in Africa we tend to live in a much more collective type way, but markets are premised on individualism. Now, of course, it means that markets, it's not negative in the fact that it allows individuals to emancipate, because when you're free to choose what kind of products you want to consume, what types of products you want to sell, then essentially you live in a free market. So that's the first group of people that we can think about. Those are the people whom we can think of as our friends, of course. Now there's another set of thinkers, of course, who are critical of markets. Not everyone is an Adam Smith or a Thomas Malthus or a David Ricardo or Friedrich Hayek. Some people criticize markets due to the greed and the gluttony as they viewed it, because, of course, after the 20th century, Christian culture became a lot more ingrained. And some of those important critics are people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who he essentially spoke. He wrote the second discourse on the origins of inequality. We also have people like Karl Marx, of course, who are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. The socialist thinkers, the left wing, he's a bit more radical. And the central theme of their discourse is inequality, and the fact that markets are disruptive and unregulated, which is why we have financial crises. We have the 1980 crisis, where there was a shock in global commodity markets that badly impacted the economies of African countries. So you find here that there's two types of thinkers. Some thinkers view the market as an opportunity, and some people focus much more on the challenges and the ills that resulted from the market. Now, of course, there's a third line of thinkers that we have to be aware about, and these are people who kind of, who take a much more nuanced approach. So we're talking about Hegel and John Stuart Mill and John Maynard Keynes, the people who were in the middle of the 19th century, so 1930s right up to the 1960s, and right from about the 18th century right up to 1960, essentially. So people like John Rawls were much more focused about markets being a really useful instrument that we can use to achieve certain goals. Whether the goal is to solve a problem in your community, whether the goal is to create employment in a particular sector, they view these markets as a tool. And now the limits of the markets as they see it should be determined by politics. So these are the people who took a much more nuanced view about what markets are. Why do we need this information? Because as free market fellows, it's easy to say, oh, well, it's easy for us to promote free markets, because at the end of the day, we just want to promote entrepreneurship. We want people to be a lot more we want people to be a lot more comfortable selling or purchasing products. We want fair rules that allows everyone to compete. But it's important as a free market fellow to think about how this thought has progressed over time. Because now we've situated it, and I'm going to stop at the origins, which is from Europe, because essentially the Enlightenment brought all of this. And if you contextualize this into the African context, then there's a different interpretation of how free markets and capitalism came into our economies, because they were much more imposed. But That's not something we're going to dive into today. Rather, yes, rather, what I'm going to do is share some very brief principles on policy advocacy to get us started. So if you just bear with me. Okay, please, I would like each and every one of you to just confirm when you can see my screen. If you
I believe everyone can see
Yes,
your
we
can
screen
can.
now.
confirm when you can see my screen, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I believe
So
everyone can
what I
see your.
want us to do today. Okay. So what I want us to do today is just to get like a broad understanding of what the advocacy process involves. And what I'm doing today is we won't focus a lot on the market side of things. We're going to look at it much more broadly because the way policy functions in our economies, they're different, but the processes that underpin them are generally the same. So when we talk about advocacy, what are we referring to? Essentially, it's a process that's designed to influence policy or decision makers to fight for a particular social change. The whole idea behind policy advocacy is that you want to achieve a specific goal. That objective in your local community could be maybe a lower time for you to register your business. It could be lower taxes for newly registered businesses. It could be export some subsidies to support businesses who want to export under a particular trade agreement. All of this is designed to change policies and influence people's attitudes, actions, decision making, etc. So essentially, with advocacy, what you're trying to do is bring people's attention to a particular issue. Now, of course, there's some golden rules when we want to engage in policy advocacy. One of those rules is that we have to get to know who are the key players in your particular sector, in your particular industry, or in your particular society. If we take an example, fuel prices, the high in Cameroon, the high in Nigeria, they're responsible for a significant portion of inflation through transport. Now you want to ensure that over time, companies who benefit from any subsidies from the government, they should make sure that they pass on that to the consumer. They should make sure that they don't increase prices every single year. The first thing you have to do is to get to understand who are the key players in the energy sector, whether it's Total or SNH or any companies. You need to find out who are the main people, who are the people that
Henry,
make the decisions. Yeah.
uh, please can you run the slide in full screen?
Okay, 1 second. Let me just.
Thank you.
I could. This is a slide we like uploaded a while back. I've been trying to download it, but unfortunately it's not downloading as I wanted to. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry guys, so it's taking a little bit long. So I uploaded this to like script a long time ago, and this is what I am. Okay, never mind. For some reason it's not. For some reason it's not like going to full screen. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, give me just 1 second. Let me see how I can do this. Okay, so whilst I figure out how to do that, like I was saying, the most important thing first is to get to know who are the people you're advocating for. Okay. Right. I'm trying to find a much more acceptable version so that I can share it with you guys. Mm.
If it isn't working, maybe we should just continue that.
No, no, it's fine. Just give me like a few minutes. I'm sure I can find a copy. But so yes, step one, you need to know who you're speaking to, the people you're speaking to, and how you want to go about the advocacy. Now, with free markets, I think in Africa, a lot more people were already a lot more market oriented because a lot of Africans engage in business of one kind or the other. A lot of Africans. So really, when you're trying to propose free market ideas, the challenge for us is to make sure that we're not presenting it as something foreign. So that's the first thing I would like us to remember. It's not something that it might have been created in the 16th, 17th centuries in Europe, but it doesn't mean now we've kind of reappropriated it to the African context. So the first thing to understand is that it's not a Western import. Um, So it's not a Western import. That's the first thing because we've taken it and we've made it our own. Now the challenge for us is presenting an approach to free markets that reflects African realities. Because it's true that over a while back, okay, um, just one strategy. Um, right. So. Okay, I'm downloading it. Just 1 second. Pardon our very slow internet. So yeah, I was saying that the most important thing for us is to first of all situate where we are in the free market debate. Last time when I gave this training, I was trying to get us to remember that free markets in Africa, in Nigeria, will be different from free markets in Cameroon, and will be different from free markets in Brazil. So when we're advocating for market-based policies, the question we want to ask ourselves is whether it reflects the African priorities and the African experience. Because the reason why I say that so forcefully is because the markets we cannot always what's the word? We cannot always set our priorities based on for example, what a Western country will do. The reason why I state that is because if you take something like healthcare, yes, we know that the private healthcare is a lot better than healthcare in public hospitals. That is an established fact. That's an established fact. But it's important that we don't simply copy systems and put in place in our local economies. Like I said, the whole point when we talk about markets should be a system where there are mechanisms for sellers to identify what appropriate price they should sell their products at, and for buyers to have a range, should have a choice of products or services that they can consume. If we live in a country where we are able to achieve that, then we already have a market-based system. Like when you go to the market, there's different sellers of breads, there's different types of breads. If you want to buy a shoe, there's different sellers of shoes, different types, different price ranges. So we already have a fairly effective market. We have a fairly effective market system. Now it's just important for us to note what are the limits of a so-called market system, because in advanced economies where we tend to view them as market-based systems, some of them give subsidies to their farmers that are equivalent to the size of South Africa's budget in a single year. And so it's important that it's important for us now to realize what are the when people talk about free markets in the European Union, what do they mean? In the United States, what do they mean? Because they're giving their farmers huge subsidies and their farmers are flooding the international markets with their products. And so someone can't then come to Africa and say, well, Africa, you people should not support your manufacturing sector or give them some subsidies to promote exports. Because if free operating in a free market environment doesn't mean that there is no government intervention, no. The idea of market-driven societies is that there are some things we're trying to limit the role of the government, not eradicate the role of the government. The government should still put on street lights. The government should ensure that it's running water. The government should ensure that waste is picked up. Businesses pay a sanitation tax or whatever. And so it's important for us to identify first, for you as a free market advocate, the whole point of me taking you guys through the initial origins of free markets is because some people who are market economists might be thinking about it from the viewpoint of John Maynard Keynes. Others might be thinking about it from John Rawls, who is much more egalitarian, and he thinks that the market system is good, yes, but we cannot ignore the challenges and the difficulties that they bring to communities, whether it's pollution, waste, inequality, that's the reality. And so the government's role, therefore, is to curb those excesses, according to John Rawls. So that's some people's mindset when it comes to the market. Others are much more Milton Friedman, who thinks the most important priority in society is protecting, for shareholders especially, is protecting the interests of their investors. And so the whole shareholder theory has dominated a lot of the policies of the United States and dominated it for a very, very long time. It's coming back in the United Kingdom now. But that way of thinking of protecting shareholder interests, pardon me, didn't really put community, society, supply chain into the mix. And so this is where the Nordic countries they haven't criticized, but they use a different approach to the approach used in the United States and the European Union. Because they believe that markets are there to serve the people, not the other way around. And so if you have hospitals, governments there make sure that the hospitals deliver quality service at competitive prices. Now, in Norway and Sweden, the government might say on your bill would pay 80%, you'd pay 25% and they'll pay 75%. For us in Africa, we're probably paying about 95% and only about, because the subsidies for healthcare are very, very low. In Cameroon, they only subsidized to about 4,000, which is less than $10 for medication that could cost up to 25 or $65. So in fact, our governments are playing much less of a role in healthcare in that regard. Now, when you want to advocate, the first thing is you have to identify your cause. What are you advocating for? We at the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, our thing is like free trade, including banks in financing for climate projects to ensure that the private sector plays a much more active role. Identify your issue. If it's the African Continental Free Trade Area, what about it do you want to enforce, or what about it do you want to influence in your local community? Maybe it's the implementation of the AfCFTA. Maybe it's making sure that more banks and more businesses trade with the Pan-African payment system using African currencies. So you have to identify your issue. Once you identify your issue, you need to have specific goals and objectives, of course. Making sure that when you have a specific goal and an objective, make sure that it's something that is quantifiable. If you say you want to start changing how people think about free trade in your country, make sure that you're not just trying to change people's minds. It's much more practical and useful if you say you want to influence 1,000 people, if you want to influence 3,000 people. Because when you set yourself that quantitative target, you can influence them. And then after that, you can You can send out a few surveys to find out how people are thinking about that issue. Are you really influencing how people make decisions? Are you influencing how those decisions are taken in different contexts? All of that will determine whether you achieve your initial policy issue. Now, your initial policy goal. Now, the challenge for us as advocates to make sure that our objectives are rooted in market-oriented solutions. The reason is we don't believe that we don't think that the government is the answer to the problems in Africa, else the government would have found the solutions a long time ago. So our role is to ensure that the private sector can play a much more active role in solving the problems and the issues that societies face. Step three are the decision makers and influencers. Now, as free market think tanks, we try to be as independent as possible. Ideally, we try not to be political. But in order for you to achieve a policy outcome, you have to be speaking to policymakers. You have to meet policymakers. You need to ensure that you're engaging with influencers. Even if you're not engaging with policymakers directly, people in the business community that can help shape that decision. It's very, very important. The fourth step, which most of us don't do, is to identify the obstacles. When we launched CEPI 2 years ago, one of the challenges that we faced is that whenever we went to present our reports or our research findings somewhere, people were like, we've not heard of you guys. We've heard of CAFU, who is much more established. They've done a lot more work across the country, but you guys, we don't know who you are. So initially, we identified that as the main obstacle for us. And as soon as we did, after that, we started making sure that anything we produce or publish, we send it to at least 25 people somewhere. So by the time we started advocating properly, you don't go into an office without seeing a policy brief on someone's table or seeing a report on someone's table. You identify your obstacles. Those obstacles could also be financial. If you're advocating without money, it means that you're doing without the funds. It means that you cannot organize a conference at a nice hotel and invite the minister and his collaborators to come. No, it means that maybe you'd have to go to a local school and borrow someone's classroom in the evening to bring a bunch of entrepreneurs there. But if you understand understanding the obstacles, it's not knowing the obstacles, it's finding ways around them that can help you to achieve your outcome. Now, step five is identify your own strengths. So I'm not going to go through all the 48 pages because I think some of the pages are much more useful than others. But as a think tank, for example, if you look at Face of Liberty might be much more adept at training entrepreneurs, shaping how people think to make sure that they create change in their local communities. That could be their approach. That's why the free market fellowship is important, because whether you're working in a hospital or for the government, or you own your own business, or you're working for a multinational, this thinking would essentially always help you to try and take a market-oriented approach to the problems that you face. Another organization could be much more research-based. So they research a particular issue, they find out what are the inconsistencies, what hasn't worked. And then after that, they go and they present the results and say, hey, see what you guys are doing here. On this infrastructure development, the process for tendering isn't very transparent. Most of the companies who get the tenders are from the public sector. We have to ensure that we bring more of the private sector actors into that, because the private sector is much more efficient. If you show them the evidence of roads that have been completed by private sector actors and that by the government, and you look at the quality and you look at people who use the road, you take comments, you do a small survey from them. As a research institute, you can leverage your strength if that's your strength. Now, some other people are good at networking. Maybe you have one issue that you want to change. You've written up a small thing or done a small presentation. You're the person who like networks. You can, you network with everyone. You can meet the relevant directors. You can meet the relevant actors in the private sector. That's your thing. You know all of the think tank leaders, how to get people to sign up to your recommendations. Maybe that's what you do. So if you're that person, then again, you need to identify that strength. You need to be setting up your meetings and going to meet people and convincing them to sign up to your recommendations and adopt them. So advocacy is really about knowing your strengths, and what are also your limitations. Like we said, those limitations could be what causes obstacles. And also partnerships. There is no one organization or one person who is doing something only by themselves, not one. So if you're interested in making sure that more women in Nigeria can exercise their property rights in religious communities, there are organizations that are thinking about that. So if Face of Liberty, for example, if you're Face of Liberty, maybe you would work with Ominira initiatives to try so that you guys have a much more stronger voice when you're doing that kind of thing. In Cameroon, if SEPI wants to do that, maybe they're going to think about working with, or it doesn't only have to be in your country. It could be in other countries as well. SEPI can be thinking of doing, trying to accelerate free trade and make sure that our traders are using our individual currencies. If I'm buying from Nigeria, I use the naira. If a Nigerian businessman is buying from Cameroon, they use the franc CFA. Maybe that's what we want to do. We find out, we say, okay, we'll sensitize maybe 100 businesses in a local community who export. We produce a report, we show the evidence, we show the steps on how to use a Pan-African payment system, and then we go for it. So partnerships are very, very important. Step 6 is, of course, your approach and your activities. Like I said earlier, everyone has a different approach. Some people, their approach is getting people together and policymakers together, having an open conversation with them, convincing them. Some people, their strength is going to meet people in their offices and speaking to them about the issues they care about and why it matters that they adopt a particular policy position. Some people are good at social media. They make videos that go viral and engage millions and millions of people. We all have a different approach. The challenge as an advocate is for you to identify what your own approach is. Are you going to write regular newspaper columns to make sure that you're reaching as many people as possible? Are you going to make sure that you create a mailing list with all of the major directors in the ministries where you send them 4 newsletters a year? To identify your own approach, but make it yours. There's no one approach that works. If anything, a mix of these approaches will probably guarantee better results than using any one of them. Step 7, of course, you've identified, you have your objective, you decision makers and influencers, you've identified the approach. Now, which type of message do you want to deliver? If you're going to go to the market and you're going to engage with people who have completed school, but not necessarily college, then you're not going to go to them and talk to them about the African Continental Free Trade Area and the EFCFTA protocols. They're not sophisticated enough for that. So you need to take another approach. You have to ensure that the message that you're sending out is something that people can relate to. If you're speaking to experts and think tank leaders, yes, you can talk about AFCFTA tools and protocols. They understand what that is. But for someone who is in the market, it's much more about making them understand that when you want to export your product to Cameroon and you change it into the dollars, it might be easy, but it's more expensive for you over the long run. With the Pan-African payment system, it's like mobile money transfer. You register on the system and you put money in your account. And if you want to buy from Cameroon, you simply use your nairas and you buy in Cameroon. And the person receives it in franc CFA in Cameroon. The person understands that, okay, for them, what you're telling them to do is that they don't have to go and look for somebody to change money into dollars to pay somebody for a product that they're buying from another country. So you have to ensure that our messages have to be designed to suit our audience. The language we use, the approach we use, and even the medium we use all differs based on our target audience. If you're going to meet the advisor to the minister to talk about an issue, he doesn't have more than 10 or 15 minutes to hear you out. So even if you take a report, you need to have a one-page summary. If you just 1 second, let me see whether I have an example here. So let's say you're going to meet someone and you want them to like take you want them to sign your recommendations for a particular issue. Maybe sometimes all you need to show them It's a small table. You say in this area, this is what I think we should do. This area here is what we should do. This area here is what we should do. Of course, if you include a few graphics, then it kind of helps the case a little bit. But the most important thing is that you want to make sure that if they pick it up in less than 5 minutes, they know what's going on. Because people don't have time to read 50-page reports. Very few people do, you know. Economists, analysts, that's the thing. But most people don't have time to do that. So you have to ensure that your message is crafted for those people. If you're in a community where they speak English, you don't go and start speaking to people, you know, big grammar and, very, very complicated English. Because if people don't understand it, then it's a waste of time. The most important thing is that what's essential is that you need to craft a message that reflects the people you're speaking to. If you're training, I'm in a meeting. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye. Go to the living room. Go to the living room. No, close the door. Sorry about that. I had some interruption. Goodbye. So I was saying that your message has to suit your audience. Finally, of course, you need to measure your advocacy progress. Just because you propose a particular policy doesn't mean that tomorrow they're going to adopt it. The most important thing for us who are for think tank leaders, for advocates, it's making sure that you understand how you're going to measure your success. If you have a particular policy that you want policymakers to adopt, maybe the first step is making sure that you have at least 25 signatures from senior directors and civil administrators from that ministry. Maybe it's 100 signatures, maybe it's 200. All the while, meanwhile, you're working to ensure that achieve achieve that. So I'm just going to share, before we go to the Q&A section, this presentation has 5 different sections. So I'm just going to share the first part where we define advocacy and we talk about the process and we talk about the differences with lobbying. And then we're going to now share some strategies that have worked elsewhere. So this should take us just about 5 minutes. But that process that I shared earlier on, I think is the most important thing that we should remember, because in every single economy, every single country, it would happen differently. So it's about taking it and making it yours. Okay, so um, like I said, advocacy is you're managing and sharing knowledge to influence policies and practices that have an impact on people's lives. The advocacy is just about you, the advocates, having the information and using it in a way that helps you achieve a specific outcome. The Heritage Foundation, a, um, a free market think tank, I would say more a conservative think tank based in the United States. Up till today, the world has signed. The reason why the United States has been slow to produce rare earth metals is because the United Nations came up with a treaty that every country has to sign in order for countries to be able to explore rare earth minerals from the seabed. Unfortunately, the Heritage Foundation thought that if the United States signs the treaty, they'll be giving away their sovereignty, because with that treaty, countries have different parts of the seabed that they can explore. It's better because it reduces the risk of conflict, etc. But the Heritage Foundation advocated fervently for policymakers not to sign it, and they didn't up till today. And so that's one of the reasons why China is one of the largest producers of rare earth metals in the world. Because when the United States had the opportunity to do this, back when Obama was president, they didn't really seize the opportunity. I give this example because although it goes to show how one think tank, and the policymakers will tell you themselves how one think tank can shape policy to the point where people in parliament or senators don't vote for a particular bill, because they've made the case that their sovereignty as Americans, their freedom as Americans is much more important than them signing off their sovereignty in some international treaty. So it's essentially having the information about how the seabed is going to be managed by the United Nations, which is not an elected body, and using that information now to influence policies. And of course, those policies have an impact on people's lives. So advocacy has to be a deliberate process. For us, it's important that it's deliberate because if you it's easy for us as think tanks to be well, not easy to be bought, but there are people out here who have different objectives to you. You might find a very rich businessman who is only concerned with taxes being cut to 15%. He would fund you every single year to as much as you want, but we have to ensure that it's deliberate and it's coming from us. It's not something that's imposed externally. If we do that, then of course, we're representing the best interests of the societies where we operate in. Advocacy is really about informing and influencing, which is here is where there's two approaches. As a think tank, you're either going to educate, inform, sensitize, bring people on board, or you're going to influence decision makers. So you'd be focused more on working on how things work from a political standpoint and trying to achieve your market-based solutions in that way. Of course, you're seeking to change things, but you need evidence. So, although some policies might make sense in theory, it's important that when you approach policymakers, you approach them with evidence for two reasons. Because ultimately, advocacy is not advocacy if you're not using practical knowledge. Yeah. The purpose should be to achieve a particular social change. If you look at the Niger Delta and what's happening in some oil producing parts of Nigeria, where you have ExxonMobil and the like, it's some people have resorted to artisanal drilling, which has detrimental impacts on the environment. Now, if you're advocating for a specific change, maybe you're setting employment quotas for companies who want to come and exploit the natural resource to sell. You need to ensure that it's directed at government policies and laws and procedure because all of our economies already have laws regarding labor rights and labor standards. You have to ensure that your advocacy is actually it's evidence based. You have to speak to the people on the ground. You need to find out what the people in those factories earn, what do the expats earn, what do the locals earn, all of that is important things that you have to consider to ensure that capitalism is actually leading to prosperity for vulnerable communities. That could be, someone's thing. Of course, advocacy, you support an issue. Maybe the issue is that companies who are, exploiting mineral resources, they need to employ locals who are going to be working in waste treatment plants so that those locals themselves don't pollute their own water sources or environment. So, it could work in different ways, but if you're just there to really advocate for one issue that you care about passionately. So, like one of the best advice that I can give is that you have to pick your issue and you have to fight for it. If you don't pick your issue, sometimes when it's difficult, you might want to give up. Sometimes when it's difficult, you might not be able to motivate yourself and your team. But if you pick your issue and you go for it, whether the funds are there or not, whether the funding is there or not, you're going to find a way to get it done. And remember that advocacy is a process. You don't go to somebody and say, well, when you look at the watch, this watch, only 5% of it is produced in Cameroon. You go to a policymaker and say, policymaker, let's make sure that 50% or 60% of this watch is produced in Cameroon. Let's only import 40%. The policymaker will tell you that we just signed a trade agreement with China for 600 million to build an aluminium smelting plant. And the 80% of this watch is from China, so we cannot really go and just start rocking that relationship that way. Which means what? Which means that advocacy is not a one-way process. It's you also listening to the realities and the experiences of that other person. Because it means that maybe that problem is not going to be solved by you going to policymakers. Maybe you need to start a petition to say that in China, you look at the Chinese law, there's a 40% to 60% product local content for their products. How come in Africa we're allowing 80% to come from elsewhere? If that's what they're doing there, that's what we should also do here. Once you start, you go somewhere, everybody signs your recommendations. Once you have 3,000, 4,000 people and you go and put it on someone's table, it will be difficult for them to argue with all of those people. So again, advocacy is not one way, it's a two-way activity. And it's really about motivating people to bring about change. If I present you this watch and I say, well, there's a company called Ilulai World that works with leather that can supply the hands. Um, there's another company called Biringa that works on glass. They're based in Cameroon. Those are the companies that can, benefit from these types of things. They employ about 500 people or 1,200 people. Then the policymakers knows that if this watch is made in Cameroon, immediately we're making it more sure for 3,000 people. So you're really trying to motivate people to see things the way you are, not lecture them because there's times when you lecture people and there's times when you try to really build a rapport. You devote your time, you experience people to understand how to get it done. Now, um, like there's different approaches to advocacy. If you want to, in Cameroon, for example, or in Nigeria, there are you have JCAM. There are organizations that represent the business community. If you go to those organizations, you can say, okay, in this organization, you go to the representatives, so they might represent all the businesses in your country. You tell them, well, we need you guys to support a bill. We want to ensure that when businesses register for the first 2 years, let them not pay any taxes so that they can get themselves settled and they can potentially expand. Those types of people are going to be able to help you lobby a lot quicker. They'll tell you, okay, go and share your research to this person, go and speak to this person, go and present to these guys here, go and present to those ones there. And then, when they go and when they meet the government and they're speaking with the government, you've already done all of the grunt work. And they are going now to lobby for the government to get that thing done. Campaigns, these are much more prevalent in like advanced economies, but also for think tanks and NGOs and organizations here in Africa who have the funds. If you want something to change, you buy all of the billboards and you slap your message on it. No matter what happens, if people see it for 1 year, they'll start thinking about that problem differently. Meetings with government officials, translation of research, education and influencing events, whether it's panel discussions, whether it's webinars. In Africa, when you start and you organize your webinar and you have 10 people, don't be discouraged. The most important thing is that when you're organizing your webinar, invite the people who matter. If you invite the 100 of the people who matter, 10 turn up, you've done more than just having 80 people who would leave and will forget about the event. So you need to ensure that if the events that we organize, which are about influencing, we're not just looking at numbers, we're also looking at impact. Create a small survey, send to them after the event. How are they going to apply what we've discussed? You can use that as evidence to show that you're actually advocating for something. Consensus building, of course, you can go to the media, talk about the issue. You can speak to journalists regularly, not only on air, call journalists, speak to them about a particular issue. Why don't we do it like this? Should we not be thinking about this way? This is how other people are thinking about it in their own countries. If you get the journalists on board without you going to meet them in person, no matter what you do, it's going to stay with them. We at the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, we've been calling for we've been calling for the government to grade at least 1,500 kilometers of road every single year and 500 kilometers of regional roads. And we've been trying to convince our friends in the media to start giving quantitative recommendations. And sometimes when we're not there, people whom we've spoken to, sometimes when we're not there, people whom we've go away, close the door, go and close the door. Uncle is in a meeting. Come and see. Yeah. Yes. So sometimes we have to make sure that the pardon me. Okay. Sometimes we have to make sure that you speak to people to get them on board because when you're not there and the CEMAC heads of states met And I wasn't the one who was there with, my friends, it was other people, but they were evoking those questions. And so it's important that you speak to you build consensus, because when you do, when you're not there, someone else will be advocating for you. And we also have to create champions, whether you're organizing an essay competition or whether you organize a small get together with entrepreneurs regularly, regardless of what you do, we have to make sure that we create our own local champions. Because if there's a problem that we face, for example, if you have a company at SEPI, there's a fintech company that we worked with when we just started called Petty Cash. They had a very great product, but just the cost of registering a fintech business alone was about 750,000, which is about $1,300. People who have built a good service, who already have about 1,000 users just through word of mouth. The fact that we were able to subsidize some of that meant that they could hire more sales agents, and today they have over 10,000 customers, active customers, and they have over 13 people in their office. If you create one champion like that and you say, okay, the reason why we're asking policymakers not to make sure that businesses don't pay taxes for the first 2 years is because they don't even have the money to complete all of these formal administrative procedures. So if you allow them to redirect those funds away from that towards something more productive, then businesses can grow. If you have the local champions there who've gone through it, then you're not just making a case in the air, you're making a case for people who have gone through who've gone through what you're proposing, what you've implemented. And lobbying, of course, is a form of advocacy. That's simply just engaging with decision makers, politicians, public officials. We have to do a mix, because when you invite a policymaker to your event or member of parliament, it's because you're trying to get them to influence that piece of legislation that they're going to see. So now, I'm going to stop here because this presentation that we created is 4 parts. It's usually given through 4 days, but I think we've done the basics. Now, I want us to have an open conversation about how you guys, whether I want to answer your questions basically. If you have any experiences you'd like to share, or if you have any oh, I see Mr. Fossey is here. Maybe Mr. Fossey, for example, well, he's our research analyst at CEPI. We're working with ICLE Africa, based in South Africa, to try and get banks to lend on climate resilient, on important climate projects. So if somebody is building a vertical farm that we see a lot in Europe, there's no reason why a local bank shouldn't fund them. So we're trying to ensure that our smart brothers and sisters who are doing really cool things, we want our banks to start taking risks. In Kenya, there's a girl who has built a filtering system directly, where regardless of where you're drinking water from, just like a straw, you put it in and you can drink water directly and it filters it. There's no reason why those innovators shouldn't have access to finance. And our advocacy is, you produce the brief, you go, you speak to the banks, you make sure that you're engaging with the managers on a regular basis. Like I said, advocacy is not just around the time of events. Make sure that these people you're speaking to them about the realities, because it would also help you understand the challenges that they face when they want to lend to these businesses. So I would like us to have is it possible for us to have a quick question and answer session? If you have any questions, any contributions, if you have an experience you want to share, please go for it. If you want to know more about how we at CEPI are doing public policy advocacy, go for it. If you want to know, how do you balance the competing interests? You have your politicians and your citizens at home, and that have a way of doing things and that have certain expectations. And you have your other partners who may have other expectations as well. So there's loads for us to engage with. Any questions at all? Are we clear on the presentation?
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Henry. I would appreciate everyone if we can be responsive. Even if we do not have any questions, please let's respond to questions being asked by Mr. Henry. so that we can make this a more engaging session, and at least we can understand that you are fully understand all of the things that has been discussed. So please and please let's respond.
So
Yeah.
what I'll do, Mr. Sani, is I want us to let's try and establish a few rules when we think about free market. So let's take the healthcare sector. In Cameroon, as you guys know, in Nigeria, we signed the Abuja Declaration back in the 1980s, late 1990s. And in the Abuja Declaration, we said that we all agreed that governments are going to spend 6% of their budget on healthcare. Very few governments in Africa have gotten to the 6% level. The governments in Africa that have gotten to 6%, their citizens have much better healthcare, access to healthcare services than us, where our governments are spending 4% because we're all relying on US aid. So if our budget had to be 6% of the budget, our governments will spend 4 and wait for the Americans and the Canadians to come and give the other 2. Now that they're cutting it, they're going to have to actually spend the 5 or 6%. So with our healthcare systems, how are we envisaging our healthcare systems? Do we think people should go to the hospital and only cover 20% of the cost? If a treatment costs 100,000 naira, do we think people should only pay 20,000? Or do we think people should pay 80,000 and the government should pay 20,000? Anyone wants to share? Masudi Haji, do you want to say something maybe?
All right, this is very interesting because this we're always very like we always participate in the session. So I'm wondering why everybody is quiet today. Give to
Yeah,
go on,
guys, I
please.
mean, come on.
Give
Mr. Haji, can you give us an example? Let everybody, I think the reason why we have to do this. If we don't do it, someone else will do it for us. Yeah. I think we have to let's set the standards for ourselves. If we don't set it, the WHO will set it. What do we think as Africans is acceptable? Because like I said earlier, free markets is different from one place to another. In Northern Europe, the government, if you have 100,000 in bills, government will pay 75 and you pay 25. How do we think it should happen in Africa? In Africa, our people, close to 40% of Cameroonians live below the poverty line, for example. Does it make sense to ask someone who lives below the poverty line to go spend 20,000 when they make double of that as their minimum, as their salary? What do we think should happen in Africa?
I think Gift
Does
is
anyone
saying
want to? Okay, so Mr. Masudi Haji, yes, give us your thoughts. What do you think? You have the floor, Mr. Masudi Haji. You need to unmute your mic.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, you have the floor.
Yeah, I actually agree with you because actually, if you look at most of the African countries, majority of them, the citizens within those countries, most of them are not doing well in terms of money. And if you actually look at different international instruments like a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, plus also some constitutions of different countries, they all actually support the right to health. That is a right to health vis-a-vis right to life. And within that way, I actually agree with you because actually people have to attain health. They have to live. I do actually agree with
Yeah,
you.
exactly. So thank you for that. I mean, the thing is, what we have to establish in Africa is what? Is that, the Europeans, the United States, they all came up with their own systems, right? That's why when we talk about free market, it's important for us to be clear what free market means in the healthcare sector in Africa. Because if we sit here today and we don't establish the fact that we're not trying to stop private hospitals from existing, people can go to private hospitals. But the question is, how do we share the cost? Because in a market economy like the United States, people don't have access to healthcare and their lives are over. People cannot access insulin when they have diabetes. People are dying. So we cannot, we have to ensure that whilst we're thinking of free markets, how do we integrate the realities of our communities when we think about something like healthcare? Because if we're saying that people should pay 20% of the cost and the government covers 80, why are we saying that? Because in Cameroon, our poverty rate is 38%. The minimum wage is 46,500. In the professional sector, it's 50,000 or 60,000. So if somebody spends 20,000 on their health care, they have 30,000 left. If their rent is 25,000, they have 5,000 left to eat for a whole month. You see? So we have to think about, if we're, as free market advocates, we want to unleash individual freedom. We want people to do well. So I encourage us to let's think about our realities. Like, um, what do we think? Like, yes, hospitals have to be better equipped, but there'll be government hospitals and private hospitals. It's mostly about how the system is built. We could even say, for example, that people who are working in the professional sector and are insured, maybe if you're paying say 200,000 naira every single year for your employees' health insurance, should we increase it to 201,000 naira so that more people should have access to basic care? Because there's some people in our societies that can contribute a bit more. And so it's about making sure that we have an efficient system. Now, some of you, I imagine, are free market, fundamentalists, where you're like, why should I be paying more for somebody else? Let's create a society where people can work and people have jobs and they can pay for their own health care. Let's have does Esther Popola want to contribute something? Anyone who wants to say something, just unmute your mic, turn on your camera and say something. Let's have an open discussion, guys, because it shouldn't take long for us. Yeah, it's taking Africa too long. We should not meet like this and we're skirting on the issue.
I think we have a contribution on the chat. Agai is saying that,
Okay.
well, I think that will take a long process because the European countries like the US and the likes are well developed, and this took them long time to achieve. So for me, Africa as a continent is way far from achieving this because we do not have a stable economy. And
Okay.
Give agrees with him. So I would want to ask, even though we want to say they started somewhere, the reason that we are here on this call is to start that
Start.
somewhere. Exactly.
Okay.
So
Yes,
to
that's
determine
it.
what
That's it.
policies and how to advocate for those policies. And if we're being honest, not speaking on the call is a deterrent to that. It's like you're against
Yes,
African
yes, yes. No,
development.
we
So
uh, we have
please,
we have to be we have to, guys, we need to be like active, because if we don't do it, someone else will do it for us. I don't leave anything, we don't leave anything to chance, because if you look at, it's the same thing that's happening with the environment, right? The debate in the West has become polarized. Oh, we need fossil fuels. Oh, we need renewable energy. But Africa is the one bearing the brunt of pollution that was caused by advanced economies. Why are we not setting the targets to say that there are things that are working in Africa? If you go to some villages in Africa, they've already they use solar panels. You can have a community of 2,000 people. They take a bit of state from the land. Norwegian companies are doing it here in Cameroon. 200,000 people, 10,000 here, some 15,000 here. They build them their own solar panels, decentralized. And villages are using much more advanced electricity than us. But when you speak to some people, they will say, oh, Africa is not ready for renewable energy yet. No, we cannot allow people to come and tell us how we should run our own systems. We need to organize concretely and think about how we want to do it. I can suggest that for from a healthcare standpoint, there are our economies are developed enough for us to ensure that everybody has access to healthcare. Our economies have enough money to ensure that people don't have to pay an arm and a leg for an aspirin for headache. In Cameroon, it's less than 10 years since we started producing paracetamol. Why is it taking us that long? Which means that what we have to do for the private sector is maybe give them the right incentives. If you're investing in a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant, then maybe you should, if the plant costs 20 million naira, maybe you can get a tax rebate for 3 million naira. So what we should be thinking about is what are the incentives that we can give for us to start making the medication for our own medication locally to start being used? What are the incentives that you can give to ensure that hospitals are properly equipped? Do our governments need to sign partnerships with Roche in Switzerland and say, okay, this is a government hospital in Nigeria. Can you give them this equipment? Every month, they're going to send you this amount of funds. And when people go to the government hospital and pay, they then take some of the funds and they send, like they do direct debit, isn't it? So we have to think about, yes, they have systems that have worked, but in Sweden, in Africa, people have not registered for birth certificate. They've not registered their birth certificates, right? On this call, for example, how many people have registered their birth certificate? In Africa, it's not common practice. It's now that UNESCO in Cameroon is trying to get families to register their birth certificates. Why? Why is it taking us 10 years? We would say that we're not Sweden or Norway. No, Sweden or Norway, what they did in the 1940s, they said that if you don't register your birth certificate, you will not have access to light. They should tell ESCOM in South Africa can do that. They can tell in EU that if by the end of the year everybody has not registered their birth certificate, they simply cut your light off. Handle your light yourself. You go to the hospital or you go to register your kids in school, you need to show the certificate that they've actually been registered, else your kids are not registered to school. People are going, they found incentives that made them work. Africa is not different. So when we sit and we say that the context is different, I think it's intellectual laziness, if I'm honest. We have to find what works for us because if you tell, for bank accounts in Cameroon, for example, now, people, before you open a bank account, you need to have a unique identifier number, like a social security number. So you go and you get your social security number first, then you open your bank account. Before it wasn't like that. When they started refusing people bank accounts and they said, if you don't have it, we don't open your bank account, everybody went and got the social security number. So we have to find the right incentives for us. And, as Africans, we have to take responsibility. There is no looking left or right. There is no, oh, what is this person doing? What has that person said? If we don't do it, nobody will come and do it for us. So I want us to, I want us not only in healthcare, even in trade, what should we do? How can we concretely use market-based solutions to solve the problems that we're facing in our community? If anyone has an example, give us an example. Just you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Shall I call randomly? I see this an Esther Popola. Esther, do you want to maybe share something?
Esther is like she's not like a part of the fellows. She's a
All right. Okay.
committee for them. Yeah, she manages information and gets them here. Esther, where are your
I
people?
see
Tell them.
Gifts. Do you want to share something? Are you delay, guys? The reason why we have to do it, like I say, if we don't do it, someone else will do it for
Gift
us.
wants to say something.
Yes, Gifts. You have the
Sorry,
floor.
I have some. Hello, everyone. I hope you're well.
Very well, thank you.
Is anyone getting me?
Yes, we can hear
we're
you.
getting you very clearly, Gift.
Okay, sorry, I have some interruptions in my background, but just to add on, I'm an hospital administrator, and we have some kind of challenge in our contemporary society. Recently, we had some shift. Initially, we were using some insurance plan in Kenya called the NHIF, but seems it was not working. They introduced another one called SAFE. So this there is a problem with the registration. Sorry. So there was some problem with the incorporation of this SIF thing. So you'll find in the registration, you'll register for that person for the halves note, the one that is not capable in the society. Upon registration, the amount that she was maybe required to pay will be 1,000 shillings, which translates to about $10. Then the same system, when someone who is capable of handling at least who can even pay at 20,000 shilling, $20, maybe she's subjected to a premium of about 600 shillings, which is 60. There was some, it's not fair in the corporation. So with me, I was thinking of as an administrator in this hospital, these hospitals, you find we don't have sufficient medicine.
Okay.
So it will be ideal if, because the same when you get to the hospital, you are being prescribed some medicine, but this medicine is not available in the facility. So I was thinking, if these administrators can come together and decide on the best way on how to ensure that we have these medicines, because they have doctors in the facilities. The same doctors gives prescription. So it's upon these administrators to have these hospital management teams in these facilities. They sit down, discuss on the drugs that they might need in this specific facility, because they're the same guys that are sending people outside there. So it's them to sit down with the HMT team to that they have to cut their budgets, because mostly we have budgets that are very useless in these facilities. Like to define, I mean, a sub-county hospital, we have several number of beds, but the kind of catchment, the population that we have, we'll even have at least like 3 people in this ward, but we have 60 bed capacity. So you don't this number of beds. It's upon these people to sit down, they prioritize on the medicine, and this medicine to be available in these hospitals, as opposed to high number of beds, high number of stretchers, but no beddings, no essential medicine in the facility. So these are some of the challenges that we should sit down, and as an advocate for AFCFTA, it's important we bring on board such administrators so that they can understand the principles that lies within the AFCFTA, so that we don't miss. We have the essential things and we don't focus on things that doesn't help us.
Thank you so much for that.
I have for you gifts. Now, as an advocate, now that you have identified the problem and with some of the things that have been taught by Mr. Henri, how do you think you can advocate for budget cuts to some of the unnecessity that are being budgeted for in the hospital, and reallocate this funding for more, for better, for more drugs to be provided and more hospital equipment to be provided? You don't have to have it all figured out. Just maybe an idea as to how you can go about it.
For you to like
very great.
Think about.
Or it could also be something for you to think about as well.
Hello?
Hello? I can't hear Gift anymore.
Am I clear?
Yes, you're clear.
Yes, you are.
I'm available. Okay, I'm thinking.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm thinking of the best people who can help us in this is for example, in my setup is the governor. Since it's the governor that is in charge of appointing this the boards of the hospital. Like, we have a problem with the board, since the board doesn't have an understanding totally on how the hospital should operate, because being that these boards are being selected as per the rewards or after the electioneering period. The way someone has campaigned for someone, that's how we'll gain, he'll gain his favor so that he can be selected to be the chairman of a specific board. So these people don't have understanding. As to me, I'd, I'd propose maybe writing the governor to elude some reality, what exists, because we have a very, very big challenge. If you wish that things should go about writing to the governor so that the governor understand, which is this is afterward, not very, very loud, so that we can put some sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you for that. I think like this is what we have to try and do. Now that you've identified that the governor can help, hospital boards have to be better managed for that budget. In order for you to get to that point, it means that you have to show where the waste is coming from, right? And if you show where the waste is coming from, how much can be saved, and how that can be used for procurement for medicines, then it's much more logical to them, because you can say, for example, that if you're spending, I don't know, if you're spending, say, $5,000 on cleaning as a hospital, maybe you should have a much more competitive bidding process to bring that down to $2,500 or $3,500. If you save that 1.5, you can use it to buy these types of medicine. So I think again, that's an area where proposing market-based solutions like open tendering is like perfect, because you'd have competitive companies that will come with like different price points. If I can, just for one thing you mentioned, was that the system, the well, gifts, whenever you fix, whenever your internet is stable, you can just turn your mic on and speak. Guys, if you have any suggestions, again, let's all share some ideas. Now, I was thinking that when it comes to the management of the systems, we have very, very smart tech companies here in Africa. You see,
Hello?
the question isn't that we don't. Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
based on the question that was asked, I was speaking, but it seems that my network had gone. So, like I was saying, the problem that we have in our facilities is they are reward based. When the hiring process is reward based, you'll find that these specific hospitals, we have some board of management, but it's unfortunate that some existing ones, like one we have around here, whereby being that it's reward based, the board of management was rewarded to a family that equally never went to never that are they're not literate, so they don't understand totally. So such would call for us being loud, someone like me being loud, writing to the governor, at least to elude some truth on how these things should operate, as opposed to having people on board who don't understand. So it's about writing to the governor so that he can understand, though it's difficult, but we just have to try. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very d'accord with you, because most of the boards that they put in place in the countries, we don't contest them. We write a communique and they say we've put this person and that person and that person, right? We don't really go to check their credentials. If we had the funds and people to do that, it would be easy to say, why are they appointing these types of people to the board? Sometimes there's a lot of corruption and like everywhere, but in Africa, we do face a specific problem of corruption, which is so those are maybe some of the things that you have to face. But the challenge is that we have to make sure that when we go to policymakers, we show them concretely, what are you saving? How are you going to benefit? Who is going to be better off? So the challenge is getting there, but once you do that and you show the governor that each year this is how much we're wasting. If the board is getting paid $2,000 for being on the board each year, why do we not find volunteers who can be on the board? Why not pay the board $1,500 instead of 2,000? Make the savings from the people who have, you see. And then if you can show concretely that, okay, this is what we can save, this is how we can buy the medicine, and this is how people are going to benefit, you can bring about some true change. Now, the market-based solutions there for us is that I think for the hospital, maybe it's the tendering process that has to change. Maybe it's the software that they use to manage the medication. We can use a just-in-time system where once a medication is used, immediately the system updates, and then you guys can see how to source from wherever you're getting the medication from. So it's also maybe a need for us to integrate to digitize the systems that we use in hospitals. But all of the solutions it's making sure that it's not just up to that governor, you see. You need to give that governor options. And you need to make sure that he can see what the final outcome will be. But before you get to the governor, I'm sure there's other people who are pretty senior and who are responsible for that issue who are not the governor. Like at the Ministry of Commerce, for example, if you want to go and talk about trade policy, there's a national coordinator for the African Continental Free Trade Area. So if you write a recommendation and send to the minister, you're wasting your time because that's the person that you have to speak to, and that's the person who has the work plan for the implementation of the AFCFTA. So if there's something that they've not done, if it's training on, say, norms and quality or phytosanitary measures, for example, that can be Yupu's recommendation, and then he can include it in their work plan. Next year, they can make sure that more people are trained on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So sometimes it's also knowing the challenge is for us to identify who we need to speak to. Who is that person that can really bring about the change? It's not always the minister. Sometimes out of 6 collaborators of the minister, there's one person who is like engaged and doing it. The rest don't care. They would see you, welcome you to the office, but they don't care. So it's mostly about, when we meet them to advocate, we also have to ensure that we're getting Africans to take responsibility for what they do. When you write to the governor or when you meet the governor's attaché and you're speaking to them, oh yeah, Mr. Masuji says that pharmaceutical centers and establishing policies that govern them to cater for low-income people. Yeah, some of the medicines from the US and UK are so expensive, and sometimes we have the medication here, right? Sometimes we have medication here for a lot of the illnesses that we would face on a regular basis. Sometimes the illnesses that we'll face are things like headache, right? And for headache, you can have a local therapeutic, but what are we not doing? In order for us to start using African medication, we have to ensure that they go through the proper certification process of the country, because every country has a process for approving medication. It's not like abroad when the medication comes to Africa, we just sell it. No, we have agencies that check them. So we now have to make sure. It's just that for you to get your drug approved in Cameroon is very, very expensive. It could be 10,000, 15,000, $25,000. A small innovator who lives in a local village that has made an oil treatment that works for something, they don't have money to go through that. So what we have to do now is to try and shape the policy process such that if somebody has a drug, they can have the drug can go through the normal process, and maybe that agency just has to be funded by the government. Or maybe the person only pays a small fee, like say $500. But we have to make sure that our own innovative products, first of all, go through that process, and then we can then say our hospitals now have to house them. So if we have to have like value chain thinking, because we do have the medications, we have the expertise. What we have to now do is to try find out how we can bring the market more into that process to ensure that low income individuals have access to medication. Thank you so much for that, Gift. You've helped us understand a bit more how the Kenyan system works. Thanks, Gift and Masudi. Does anybody else want to share an experience that we can learn from? Does anyone else want to share anything? Okay, Mr. Ahmed, I'll let you take over, okay? I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you very much, and I apologize that I've not turned on my video because I had to switch to my phone, and it's kind of quite dicey using my phone. But thank you very much for
No,
that
it's
very
all right.
fun.
You're absolutely welcome. You're very welcome.
Yeah, I'm quite disappointed in our fellows as they have not really engaged as I hoped that they would. Trust me, they are not usually like this. Maybe the rain, because it's raining here, and obviously in some other parts of Africa, the rain has allowed them to recoil in their shell. So,
Okay, well,
hopefully,
I have to go. I have to go to the next thing. But guys, like I say, there's nobody will come and save us. Yeah. We don't have time to complain. We don't have time for complainers. We just have to do it because ultimately, if we sit on a call like this and it takes us 30 minutes to talk about two countries' healthcare system, you know, we need to make sure that we need to identify what needs to change because if we don't, the GIZ will come and do it, the UN will come and do it. We have to you as free market fellows, you guys have to make sure that you're the one identifying the solutions to the problems that we face. If you look at even something like housing, for example, I've not seen most of us are young people here. I'm sure later in life, all of us hope that we'll be able to build our own small houses and live with our families, no? Those are things we have to, if we're not talking about how to ensure that building permits don't become a problem, how to ensure that people have access to homes, then what kind of Africa are we honestly building? That's so I encourage everyone to, we have to do it. We if we don't do it and we wait around, someone will come and do it for us. It's important that we engage with these issues. Yeah. So, Mr. Sani, I have to rush, but good job. It was good to. I'm happy and I'm glad. I hope that we all learned something. And yes, have a good weekend. And guys, keep advocating, hang in there, and make sure that your voice is heard because the change will not happen without us. Yeah. All right. Have a good evening. Goodbye.
right. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Henry. Would you be kind enough to share the slides you were teaching from? Because even though you obviously mentioned that the slides is a bit longer and had some unnecessary stuff, I still believe it to be
Well,
helpful for those if they
yeah,
can
I mean,
practice
I
it
can
on.
share this. I can share the section that the section I presented about policy advocacy and the definitions and that process because it's
All right.
4 parts. So we usually just like use it when we're giving the trainings as opposed to share it. But for you guys, I would have a member of the team remove the sections and put them in a nice separate slide and send over. So maybe next week, Monday evening or Tuesday at the very latest, you should have them.
That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate you. And we hope to see